Hello and welcome to the second part of this three-parter bonus episode of Melee's Turn Wheel, where last time I took you guys through the first 10 games that I played through in 2023. I've been going through and ranking these games from my least favorite all the way to my favorite. Last time we did numbers 30 through 21, so this time we'll be taking a look at numbers 20 through 11. And talking about all those games. Honestly, I'm going to say this one is going to be a bit shorter than the last one. I think I have, the middle of the list is kind of where I expected to have a little bit less to say about these games. I do have a lot to say about several of them, especially towards the end. But for the most part, a lot of these games are pretty good. I enjoyed them quite a bit, but aren't like the upper echelon of games that I played this year. So, hopefully this one's not going to be quite as long as the previous one, but I guess we'll see. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with number 20 on the list, which is Pokemon Violet, technically. I played both. I actually only technically beat Violet, although I did get very close to beating Scarlet as well. Pokemon. I mean, it's Pokemon. What can you really say about Pokemon that hasn't really already been said? Well, I can actually come up with a couple things. So Pokemon Scarlet and Violet talked to death for multiple reasons, being some of the most innovative games that probably the most innovative games that the series has ever had since the very first, Pokemon Red and Blue or whatever. Also, unfortunately, marred by very serious problems, especially performance problems, that held them back for a lot of people. But, I enjoyed them overall. I think so. Pokemon is a series that I have a very interesting relationship with. I love the series to death. It's one of my favorite game series. I've been playing them since I was a kid. I started with Pokemon Fire Red all the way back in fucking 2003. I don't know when those games came out, but I had the same. As far as I'm aware, actually, I had the same Fire Red cartridge that I had when I was a kid. I still have that, and I would probably be playing it till the day I die because that's still one of my favorite games in the series. But I played through Gen 4, Gen 5. I went through that same phase that everybody goes through, where most people go through when you're like, early teens, where like Pokemon's, I'm too old for Pokemon. And I dropped the series for a while, then I got back into it right as Gen 6 was coming out. Gen 7, I hate Gen 7, but Gen 8. And then now up to Gen 9. And I have had a very mixed relationship on a lot of these games. I mean, it's no surprise that they don't get enough time in the oven to cook for the most part. I mean, they're rushed through development a lot of the time. At least that's kind of the general consensus, because they need to get the games out so that they can get the new Pokemon out so that they can do all the tie-in merch and all the spin-off games and the anime. And, it's the highest grossing media franchise of all time. That might not actually. Is it Hello Kitty now? Did Hello Kitty pass it? I don't know. Something. It's around. It's top 3 for sure. Maybe number 1. But a part of why it makes so much money is that they have to cut corners in some places. They have to cut costs. They have to make sure that they're getting games out in a timely manner. And they've had a maybe not necessarily a yearly release schedule, especially not for new games, but a yearly content cycle. So like a new game or DLC or a remake, that's been going on nearly every year since I want to say 2015, ever since ORAS came out, I want to say, but I'm not 100% sure. Maybe since Gen 7, I don't really know. But and in some ways it's such a shame to see Scarlet and Violet be so good in so many ways and yet have so many glaring problems that are so obvious and would not, I don't want to say they wouldn't take as much effort to fix, but they certainly, I'm sure they know about the problems, and I'm sure they're competent enough to fix them if they were given them a proper amount of time, proper budget. But unfortunately, as it stands, doesn't seem like it's going to go any different way anytime in the near future. I mean, the DLC came out, and that has even bigger performance issues, I've heard. So, I don't know. I've not played the DLC. I don't really have any plans to. I mean, maybe at some point. I doubt it, but maybe. I think ultimately, I've been kind of talking about the Pokemon series as a whole and not so much about Scarlet and Violet. I do think that Scarlet and Violet have some, the open world mechanic is really cool. I know people really don't like the fact that the world does not scale with you. So like, the gym badges that you have not, scaling up so that there's a difficulty curve, right? Because as it stands, you could just go to the 8th gym leader right away, get your ass beat. Or, if you do the 4th gym leader and your team is a high enough level for it, then all of a sudden gyms 1 through 3 are all piss easy and not even worth doing anymore. So there definitely should have been some kind of scaling system in there. I kind of like it the way it is, at least for this one game. I do hope that they introduce a scaling system if they do this again in another game. But for this one, I'm glad that they did it the way they did, just because it's such a breath of fresh air seeing Game Freak, a studio that has always been so piss scared since like Gen 3 or Gen 4 of letting players do things in orders that might cause them to have difficulty, like refusing to let the player get lost or go to an area that's going to be too difficult for them. All that stuff is, it's nice to see them deviate away from that. Although I do hope again next time that they do it a little bit more thoughtfully. But as it stands, I just think it's a fun change of pace. Overall, I'm pretty lukewarm on these games. I like them, but they're not fantastic. And what's sad is I did realize, I was thinking about this, I'm like, I think these might be like in my top 3 favorite Pokemon games, or at least my top 5 favorite Pokemon, or my top 3 favorite Pokemon generations. Like I like Gen 5 more, I like Gen 3 more, but outside of that, I think Scarlet and Violet might be next up on that list. And I think that realizing that was when I was like, maybe I don't like Pokemon anymore. Maybe this is where I have to draw the line and say I don't know if I fuck with the series anymore. But we'll see. I'll definitely, like, I haven't bought a Pokemon game in. Actually, no, that's not true. I bought Shield when it came out. I bought it secondhand, but I did buy it. And I'm not. I won't. I'll let you use your imagination for how I played these games without buying them. But yeah, I mean, Legends Arceus was really good. Legends Arceus is still my favorite Pokemon game, and it was, if you remember, that was not technically in my top 5 games from last year, but it was pretty close. It was the honorable mention for that year. So it was, yeah, I mean, I like that game quite a bit. And last year's competition was quite a bit stiffer, as we'll kind of see as we go further into the list. But yeah, so I'm not quite ready to give up the ghost yet, especially if they make another Legends game. I'll hop on that shit like immediately, but in terms of mainline Pokemon, I don't know. I might be tapped out. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, anyway, that's Pokemon Violet, Pokemon Scarlet. I should say this is something that I kind of didn't really get into, but I think that this has some of the best writing in any Pokemon game. The best characters, for sure. Like, this is easily the best cast of characters that the series has ever seen. My favorite character in the whole series is the director of the Academy, Clavel, I think is his name. I really like Arvin. I really like the team's star people. Nimona isn't my favorite rival, but she's pretty good. She's pretty high up there, I would say. So many good characters in this one. And then the story is just nice. It's not like groundbreaking or revolutionary or anything, but it's pretty good. I like it. So if that appeals to you at all, saying best writing in the series is not a very high bar for Pokemon, but it is, it's something. So worth keeping in mind, I guess. Okay, I think that's about all I had to say about this. Again, not that much really to say. It's Pokemon, you kind of know what you're getting into, I think, but it's worth the play. If you thought maybe Gen 8 was really not your cup of tea and you thought, I don't think I'm going to give this one a try, might be worth giving it a try. It's definitely better than Gen 8. I'll say that much. I'm not even like, I like Gen 8, but Gen 9 kind of blows it out of the water. I definitely feel that way. All right, next up we have one of a couple Zelda games, a few Zelda games actually. Because I definitely knocked out a couple Zelda games this year, alongside, Tears of the Kingdom, which, surprise, surprise, is going to be on this list at some point, a little bit higher up, though. I played The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords for the first time, and you might be surprised if you've played that game to see it this high up, because it's not that good, to be honest. I mean, like, it's really short, it's really simple, doesn't have a whole lot going on. I mean, the story is basically non-existent. It lifts the graphics from Minish Cap, or actually, I guess I should say the Minish Cap lifts the graphics from 4 Swords. It doesn't really it barely feels like a Zelda game. You know, like you could sell this as a mobile game and it would probably feel right at home, right? But I'll tell you what makes the difference, and that's the fact that I got 3 of my friends together and we played it, and we all had one brain cell, and it was a lot of fun. We were just fucking each other over. We were just having a good time. It was a blast, honestly. And I think you know, I just like I don't play a lot of multiplayer games, especially not like competitive multiplayer games, you know, like shooters or anything like that. But when I get the opportunity to, I like playing cooperative games, you know, with friends that I like. One of my favorite games ever, and I will not apologize for this. One of my favorite games of all time is Among Us. And no, I know that's a meme. I know, you know, funny imposter, haha, sus. But I mean, it's just a fun fucking game, you know. Like you get like 5 or 6 of your friends together. We probably need more, but you know, you get a handful of your friends together. You play that, you know, you can gaslight people. You just it's just a fun time. I just like it. Four Swords is kind of the same way. I mean, obviously it's nothing like Among Us, but just getting friends together and doing something silly and goofy, it's just always a fun time. I wish that I could segue right into another game that captures that feeling very well, but unfortunately I'm not able to do that. Because next up we have another Zelda game, The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons. I did not play Ages this year. I thought about it. I was like, maybe I'll just knock them both out. But no, I'd played Seasons a little bit. I'd gotten like maybe halfway through. I decided to just polish it off. So Oracle of Seasons is a good game. It's very similar if you've ever played Link's Awakening. And I really, really like Link's Awakening. Link's Awakening is my second or third favorite Zelda game, probably. And a big part of that is I really like the gameplay. I played, you know, the original Link's Awakening. I haven't played the remake, but the original Link's Awakening, you know, it's clunky. It's a, you know, Game Boy game. You know, the button mapping is a little wonky, but like it's fun. It's simple. You know, the world felt really fun to explore. I had a good time. The Oracle games are very similar. They're built on a very similar foundation. They have almost identical gameplay in terms of like the actual like movement and, you know, all the button shit holding Link's Awakening back. But in some ways it does better. In some ways it does worse. I mean, first of all, it's worth mentioning that Link's Awakening just has a really good story. One of my favorite stories in the entire series. And Oracle of Seasons does not have that, which is fair enough. I mean, you know, it's kind of the Link's Awakening story was kind of lightning in a bottle. I wouldn't really expect them to capture that again. But I also do think that the world was a lot less cohesive, I guess is maybe the right word, or intuitive. It felt like a bit more of a chore to get around, basically. By the end of the game, so Link's Awakening, I pretty much never needed a guide. I think I might have needed a guide like a couple points, because it felt very like, okay, you beat this dungeon, then you can like go and it'll like tell you like roughly where the next place to go is, and you can go there. And generally, I mean, you know, maybe it's just me, but I was able to kind of intuit what I needed to do. I was able to find the things just by exploring the things I needed to progress, and it just always felt like I was moving at a good clip. Oracle of Seasons, I was glued to a guide for the entire back half. I could not figure out what the fuck I was doing, where the fuck I was going. It was just kind of a mess. So, but on the other hand, the dungeons were probably significantly better than Link's Awakening. Link's Awakening had good dungeons, but only really one of them stood out. It was Eagle's Tower, obviously. Several of the Oracle of Seasons dungeons were pretty cool. I don't remember, honestly, that many of them off the top of my head, but I do remember enjoying most of them. I like the one where you get the magnetic gloves. I like the one where you get the fucking the shit. Oh no, what was the one? Here, let me check the item list. I don't remember. It was the one, I think it was the one after the magnetic gloves, because I had the magnetic gloves going in, I think. I don't remember what item you got in there, but that one was fun. Yeah, just some good dungeons overall. And the bosses were fine. I'd say they're better than Link to the Past overall, for sure. So, you know, it's a good game. You know, it's smack dab right in the middle of the list, so you can't really, you know, I'm not you know, I'm sure you're not expecting me to have a whole lot to say about it, but it's pretty good. I liked it. All right. So while we're on the subject of games that honestly aren't that great, but I had a lot of fun with them because I played them with a group of friends. Next up, we have a little game by the name of Gang Beasts. So technically, I actually have quite a bit of experience with this game. I played this for the first time. I think I might have even been in high school, either that or early college, while it was still in beta. I don't know when it was officially. I don't know, but I played it. I played it while it was still in like the alpha or beta build. And it's like it sucks, you know. It's you play as it's like a fighting game kind of, where you play as like some guys, going around. You're like little Teletubby guys, and you have to press buttons that map to like your arms and legs, and it's almost like what's that fucking game? Oh god. No, not that's not what I meant by running games. Quap. Yes, it's called Quap. It's kind of like Quap, but as like an arena fighter. And you have to like grab onto the guys, and you can like lift them up and throw them off the cliff. You can like punch them, and then it'll knock them out. It makes it easier for you to lift them. Watch like 5 minutes of footage of this game, and you'll get the point. I don't have anything meaningful or insightful to say about this game, guys. It was just fun. I had a good time with it. And I haven't really played as much of it as I would like to. But like I kind of got back into it a little bit this year, so I decided to include it. And I had a good time, and I hope I get to play more of it soon. Okay. Ooh, all right. Kind of going to a completely different direction here. Next up, Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Now, this is a game. If you were on YouTube in the year of our Lord, 2010, or in the years kind of immediately after that, you would know that this game is extremely popular. This is a very well-known horror game. Got played by every YouTuber under the sun. I think, is this what got Markiplier famous? I think it was something like this. Or either that, or he played it like really early on in his career. Amnesia: The Dark Descent it's a horror game. You play as a guy who lost his memories, and he knows I'm like, I gotta get deeper into this castle. But that's all he remembers. And as you go through, you encounter monsters. You don't have any way of fighting back. That's like the really terrifying thing. And what I think horror games, a lot of horror games, give you some method of fighting back, even if it's not very effective. Like Resident Evil gives you a gun, even if it's kind of clunky, stuff like that. But no, in this game, monsters are basically completely immortal. And if one of them finds you, you will, you have to run away or you will die. And it's compounded by the sanity system. So like anytime you are looking at something that's like freaky, or if you're in darkness for long enough, you start to lose sanity. If you start to lose sanity, then your perception gets all out of whack. You can start to see things that aren't there. And it can be honestly really punishing. This is a very punishing game. And that, along with the fact that I am a huge wimp when it comes to horror games. I do not handle horror games very well. I hate being scared. That's not true. I kind of like being scared. I just don't handle it very well. I where was I going with this? Yes, because of the fact that it's punishing, and because of the fact that I'm a wimp with horror games, I was glued to a guide the whole time. I might not have, if it was one or the other, then I might not have done the guide. And I mean, I know that playing with a guide kind of like takes a lot of the spook out of it. I mean, that was the point, like I wanted to know where the monsters were going to be. I wanted to know when I was going to get jump scared. Trust me, I was still plenty scared. Anytime I was like, they're like, okay, you're coming up on a section where you're going to get chased by a monster. And I'm like, okay, great. And then I would do it, and I'd be like, fuck, what if I fuck up? What if I fuck up? What if I like press the wrong button and I die? Yeah, I mean, I was still scared. But I think the bigger thing was that, it's kind of I guess not collectathon. You go around and you have to like it's kind of like Resident Evil in the sense that you have to like go around and there are puzzles that you have to solve. You have to get very specific items to solve these puzzles. There are some physics-based puzzles too, which are kind of cool. But wandering around too much is very, if you go into the room and don't realize that what you need is in there, or if you go to like the wrong direction down a hallway, um, you are pretty heavily punished by not, by losing your sanity or losing health, God forbid, if you run into a monster, and it's just kind of a mess. So I decided to play with a guide, and I don't regret it. It was still a great time. It got it high enough up on this list. I think, honestly, it would be lower on the list if I hadn't used the guide. So yeah, it was a fun time. I really enjoyed myself. If you like horror games, give Amnesia. Okay, so has it aged perfectly? No. It is definitely a little bit on the tedious side. But the atmosphere is so good, and the story is pretty interesting. It's kind of wonky and doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but it's pretty interesting. It's cool. Yeah, give that a shot. If you're one of like 4 people like me who up to this point hasn't played it yet. All right, next up. Ooh, okay, let's talk about this one. So the next game on the list is called A Short Hike. And A Short Hike, actually, let me see something real quick. So I am, if you do, was it itch.io, is like a game platform, it's kind of like Steam, but for more like smaller indie games, basically. And you can buy games. Back when, I say back when, as if it's not still going on, but like back when kind of the public consciousness of the whole Ukraine situation was very high, they were doing a bundle where you could pay like $10 and you'd get like a shitload of games. And one of them that I got was A Short Hike. And actually one of the other games that I played this year was also on that list. And I'm looking right now because, yeah, I guess I should know better than to think there'd be something for Palestine, but, yeah, I mean, I guess I'll take this opportunity to throw in a PSA. Free Palestine. But that's neither here nor there. Either way, it was a good cause, and I'm glad that I supported it. And yeah, I played A Short Hike. I'm getting off topic a little bit. A Short Hike is a game where you play as a little bird, and he's on vacation or whatever, and he's like, I'm bored. I am going to climb up the mountain on the island that I'm living on. And it's kind of like a nice little tradition, I guess, that if you really want to do something cool and fun on this island, you climb up the mountain, and you spend the game going around, and you can get collectibles, you get items. What you really need is golden feathers. If you get golden feathers, then that increases the amount of, I think, climbing that you can do, because you can't fly. You're a bird, but you can't fly. Instead, you can glide. So you need to climb to get high, and then you can jump off and then glide around. So you need a certain number of gold feathers. If you know where the gold feathers are, then this is a game, this is probably like a 5-minute speed run, like tops. If you know where they are, you can get to the top of the mountain extremely easily. But that's not really the point. The point of the game, and I mean, if you enjoy playing it fast, like obviously that's fine. But like the kind of the idea of the game is that you're just supposed to explore the island, soak in the vibes, soak in the atmosphere, and just relax. Take your time, take your pace. Pick your own pace, and go around, collect the feathers, talk to people, explore. You can get up to the top of the mountain while like ignoring huge chunks of the game. Like I got to the top of the mountain and I started flying down, and as I was flying down, I've discovered areas that I hadn't even seen the first time through. And it was just great. It's just a really good time. Even like this took me maybe 30 to 45 minutes, and that's kind of, I think, on the slower end. If you're like really thoroughly exploring, it may maybe take you like an hour, but it's a nice way to spend a little bit of time. If you have a little bit of time to kill and you're in a good mood, you maybe turn the lights off, put your headphones on, just really get in that nice headspace and relax. And yeah, great game. Would highly recommend if you have a little bit of time to kill. Hello, everyone. I'm recording this just because I wanted to let you guys know that I'm recording this in post, because I wanted to let you guys know that I misgendered the bird. The protagonist of A Short Hike is a girl, and I think that it's important to acknowledge that, because so many games default. I did it. Like, I mean, obviously it's not a particularly you can't tell what gender the bird is by looking at it. So you have to kind of pay attention to the dialogue. And I just forgot. I assumed it was a guy because, like, how many games do you play guys, and how many games do you play girl protagonists in comparison? So I just thought it was important to mention because I fell into the old trap of assuming that males are just kind of the default, which is something I'm trying to avoid doing. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. So yeah, Claire, protagonist of A Short Hike. Good game. Highly recommend, as I said. All right, I hope you guys are ready to go from 0 to 100 real quick, because next up we're talking about some JRPGs and visual novels that are very dense and long. So pretty much the exact opposite of most of the games I've been talking about up to this point. Next up, what number are we on now? Fucking 24, I think? Yeah, it's 24. 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim. This is a game that I've had recommended to me by so many people. I've had so many friends say, this game is great. This is like one of my favorite games of all time. It's fantastic. You should play it. And I played it, and it was very good. Would I say it's one of my favorite games of all time? No. Not 24. This is 14. Okay, yeah, I was like, that doesn't make sense. No, but it is quite good. I enjoyed it quite a bit. 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim is about... Well, that's the thing. That's kind of what I don't like about it, because it takes a long time. I mean, I would say it's a long time. Maybe not for people who are smarter than me or whatever, but it can take a while to really understand what is even happening in the game. It tells a non-chronological story that centers around 13 different protagonists, and you take control of each of them during like different story scenes. You can do the story scenes in mostly any order. There are some prerequisites, like you need to see this person's 5th scene before you can see this person's 2nd scene or whatever. Things like that. But the stories are, again, not in chronological order. I don't actually even know if every protagonist story is in chronological order within itself. I'm pretty sure it is. But the different protagonists are definitely not in chronological order relative to each other. And then, of course, you can hop around. It's a whole big thing, and it's really cool. I like that. Non-linear storytelling is really awesome. I love it in the fucking Zero Escape games. Zero Time Dilemma may be, a little bit not everybody's favorite game of all time, but it's certainly, I liked it, and I think the non-linear storytelling was definitely a part of that. There's also an RTS segment, which I've heard mixed things on. Other than the story scenes, the other main game mode is like a pseudo real-time strategy game / tower defense game. I honestly quite liked it. I thought it was a lot of fun. I think upgrading the different mechs had a lot of there was a lot of different there's mechs in this, yeah, in case I didn't make that very obvious. But upgrading the different mechs felt fun. It felt unique, and the game feel of the RTS sections is like spectacular. The sound effects, the visuals, everything just, it feels so punchy and weighty, and it's great. But yeah, it takes a little bit for the story. I'm not even going to say it takes a bit for the story to get interesting, because it gets interesting right away. But it's one of those games where it hooked me in right away, but it had a little bit of a tough time keeping me on the hook, because I was interested in all these different plot elements, but I didn't feel like they were being delivered on in... it was taking them a while for them to deliver on any of these questions and concepts that I was interested in. And so I was kind of like not vibing with it for a little bit in the middle there. But then it ends on a very good note. I like the way it ends. It's quite good. I mean, it's just a great game all around, I'm complaining about it a little bit. And the only reason I'm even doing that is because, again, I've talk to people who consider this to be one of the best games they've ever played. So I'm kind of just trying to explain why I personally don't feel that way. But I can absolutely understand where those people are coming from. The story it tells is really interesting and unique. The gameplay and story concepts that it works with is very interesting. There's a lot of fantastic mystery elements that once they get going and once you start feeling like questions are being answered, I was hooked the whole way through, basically. Once it started like kick it into high gear, so to speak. Yeah, great game. Highly recommend. I mean, I probably am just going to end every game that I talk about going forward with that for the rest of the list. All right, next up, The Great Ace Attorney Adventures, I think is the name. So, Great Ace Attorney is a prequel series, kind of, to the Ace Attorney series of games, if you've ever played or heard of those. They take place in 1800s Great Britain, with the ancestor of Phoenix Wright, who is the protagonist of the main series games, or I guess the main timeline games, whatever. These aren't really spin-offs; they're pretty much just straight up Ace Attorney games. I'd say they're more similar to the core Ace Attorney games than investigations games are. But yeah, anyway, Phoenix Wright is the protagonist of the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, the first few games, and the main character of the Great Ace Attorney is his ancestor, Ryunosuke Naruhodo. And it's just the story of how he comes to be a lawyer and how he ends up having a passion for being a lawyer. It has nothing to do with why Phoenix Wright wants to be a lawyer. We have a whole, the whole backstory on that is all set in stone. But I guess it's just to show that, like, there's, like, a cool guy in Phoenix Wright's lineage that also did cool lawyer shit. I don't know. It's cool. For a long time, these were not available in the United States or outside of Japan at all, for that matter, I don't believe. You could only play them. I mean, I guess I'm sure that there were fan translations out there, but especially back then, 3DS emulation was not particularly stable. So emulating and fan translating these games on 3DS is probably not feasible for most people. However, in I don't know, a couple years ago now, I want to say it was like 2020 or 2021, they bundled the two, because there's two Ace Attorney games. I'm only talking about, or two great Ace Attorney games. I'm only talking about the first one. I only played the first one. I bundled those two and ported them to Switch, and also localized that Switch port of the two games together outside of Japan. So that's how you would play the games now. I think it's also available on PC and maybe even other platforms like PS4 or whatever. And I have to say, as far as Ace Attorney games go, I was a little bit let down. The cases in this game were not spectacular, in my opinion. I liked the last case quite a bit, but outside of that, I was very lukewarm on the majority of the cases, and I actually really did not like the second case in this game. It was kind of mediocre. I thought it was very contrived, and I think it's building up to something in the second game, but I'm not entirely sure what it is. So until I get that payoff, I'm just going to assume that it's shit and I don't like it. One of my least favorite cases in the series. But it's also perfectly fine, right? Like all the cases are, except for that one, all the cases are at least pretty good. And it's a really good game. It's ranks among my least favorites for the Ace Attorney series, but I love the Ace Attorney series so much. The average game in that series is like one of my favorite games of all time. So saying that it ranks low for the Ace Attorney series is not really an insult. It just didn't hit that same spot for me personally as some of the other better games did. With that being said, it's still a great story. It's still, pushes you to be creative, come up with use your deductive reasoning skills. There we go. Solve mysteries. It's a great story with great characters. Sherlock Sholmes is in this game. He's obviously supposed to be Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, for a long time, I don't know the full story behind this, but the Arthur Conan Doyle estate. Arthur Conan Doyle, of course, being the man who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories. His estate is very protective of the Sherlock Holmes name, so a lot of stories and other media, if they want to use Sherlock Holmes, will instead call him Herlock Sholmes, and then just still be basically exactly the same exactly the same character. Um, and that's basically what they do here. Although, I mean, Sherlock Sholmes is pretty distinct from Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, I've read a few of the Sherlock Holmes stories, and he's a fun guy. He has like a good sense of humor and stuff like that, and does rely on others at times. However, Sherlock Sholmes is a fucking off the wall psychopath. He's such a creature. And he's like borderline incompetent in some situations. He's very competent in some situations, very incompetent in others. So it's a really interesting characterization for the great detective. And he's one of the best characters in the entire series. I would not hesitate to put him in my top 5 Ace Attorney characters of all time or whatever. Yeah, he's great, fantastic. So he alone is a reason to play this game, if nothing else. I'm very excited to check out the sequel, probably next year. Not 100% sure. That is the only Ace Attorney game at this point that I have not played, but we will see. I'm not sure. I'm not sure when I'll get around to it, but hopefully it'll be soon. Okay, let's do this one more time. The Legend of Heroes Trails. I'm going to talk about them both at the same time. The Legend of Heroes Trails into Reverie and The Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel 1. Both of these games I have back to back, and you can sort of effectively think of this as a tie because I do really, really like both of these games. They're both phenomenal. I love a lot of aspects of them. If I had to pick, gun to my head, which one I prefer, I would say Trails of Cold Steel 1. But I think it's very, very, very close. I think they excel in different aspects. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of them. I'll talk about Trails of Cold Steel 1 first, because I actually think, despite it being like the one I like slightly more, I think it kind of like sets up what I want to say about Reverie a little bit better. So I'm going to start with Cold Steel 1. So Trails of Cold Steel 1 is a bit of a change of form for the series. I've kind of talked about this in the last episode where I talked about Trails of Cold Steel 2, 3, and 4. It represented, I think, for myself at least, and for a lot of other players, a shift in priorities. They were effectively telling a different type of story in Trails of Cold Steel 1. It had less emphasis on the geopolitics, which is fine. Not even necessarily less emphasis on the geopolitics. I think I'm being a little overly generous to Cold Steel 1 when I say that, if I'm being entirely honest. It's not necessarily that they were trying to tell a different type of story. It's that they kind of they were trying to tell the same type of story that they had told, but they did it badly. Just being entirely honest. The geopolitics of Erebonia is just not as interesting to me. I think they had a lot of cool pieces to work with, but they insist on, the Erebonia is enormous, and because of it's so big, and they have you go to like each of the different provinces. You only explore one half of Erebonia in the first 2 games, and then the second half of Erebonia in the later 2 games. So there's a lot of ground to cover here, and I really do feel like it stretched itself a little bit too thin. I didn't really feel attached or motivated to protect any of these places in the same way that I felt attached to Crossbell City. That's maybe an unfair example because Crossbell City is like the best town, city, settlement in any of these games. But like even like the countries or the different provinces of Liberal from the Sky games, or different areas of Crossbell State in the Crossbell games. Like Armorica Village is a really cool location that I liked a lot. Rolent is fantastic from Liberal. Rouen, I think, had a really nice atmosphere. I don't know. There's something about it's hard to put my name on it, but there's just something about the vibes in Cold Steel 1 that just felt a little bit off when it comes to looking at it through the lens of the stories the previous games were trying to tell. The story, the overarching story, this is just a lot of words to say that the overarching story was just not as interesting to me, and I do think it was poorly executed in a lot of ways. It really started leaning into the villains being kind of mediocre. Not that it started with Trails of Cold Steel 1. I would actually say it goes a little bit further back than that, which we'll talk about later on. But Trails of Cold Steel 1 really does just say, all right, I hope you like having no cool villains. I actually do like the Cold Steel 1 villains more than the later games, but not as much as the earlier games in the series. So, it's kind of still in this transitional period where I think the villains are still all right, but they're not quite as good. There Vulcan and Gideon are both pretty fucking cool. I like them quite a bit. I have mixed opinions on the rest of them. So still a decent cast of villains that I enjoyed a fair bit, but definitely felt lacking in that regard. So why, I'm talking about, how it failed. I'm talking about all these things I don't like about it. What does it do well that I ranked it higher than those other games, Cold Steel 2, 3, and 4? Because I have said that those other games do suffer from similar problems, even if they're, maybe to a little bit of a higher extent. Well, Trails of Cold Steel 1 shifts its emphasis to a bit more of a kind of slice of life, more traditional JRPG anime type narrative, right? Which is a little bit of a shame to see. When I say anime type, it's set in high school. You're playing as a high school student. You're going to high school. You're hanging out with your high school friends. You're having to deal with high school problems. And it's like, I can drown someone in anime or JRPGs that take place in a high school setting. And it's like, it was kind of nice that you're actually playing as fucking adults for once. I guess the liberal games, you're playing as high school age students as well, or high school age people as well, but you have a job. You're like police officers basically. And then in Crossbell you're literally police officers. So it didn't really give off the same vibes. So that's a little bit of a shame that they chose to go for such a kind of a stock setting for the Cold Steel games, but to its credit, I think it is actually executed very well. I think Thor's Military Academy is a great setting. I feel almost as attached to it as I feel attached to like Crossbell City in the Crossbell games, which is kind of crazy. Like I had to kind of have to step back and think about it. Like, really? But yeah, no, I mean, I really like Thor's Military Academy. Not only are the other students like that are main characters in Trails of Cold Steel 1 generally very interesting. I love Eustace, I love Machias, I love Elliot, I love Emma, and to a lesser extent, I love, that's kind of where I have to stop, unfortunately. Oh no, Gaius, I love Gaius. Elisa, Laura, and Fee, I think were never particularly interesting, and then most of those other characters that I just listed, get less interesting kind of as the games go on. I'll be honest, Emma was not really that interesting in the first game either. I just kind of like her a lot because I like her design. So that one, maybe scratch that one as well. But the other characters, they start off interesting and then they kind of fall off over the course of the subsequent Cold Steel games. In Trails of Cold Steel 1, though, all of those characters that I listed off were genuinely very interesting. I was very invested in their struggles, in their stories, and I wanted to see more of them. For what it's worth, of those characters, the only one that I think remains consistently good throughout all 4 games is Elliot Craig. Elliot Craig is my favorite Cold Steel character by a lot, I think, or at least like my favorite of the Class 7 members. Or the old Class 7 members. Ash Carbide is probably better, but I don't know. I like Elliot a lot as well. And then, but anyway, I got a little bit off topic because what I was going to say is, as much as I like the Class 7 members, the main important characters, the random NPCs, like the guys who you just kind of like hanging out with on a day-to-day basis, hanging around the school, you got like Lambert, the captain of the riding club. He's pretty cool. I like him. I like the girl, Ferris, I think is her name, the girl who does the lacrosse club with Elisa, and they form like a little rivalry. That's pretty awesome. Characters like that kind of make the setting feel a lot more alive and interesting than it would otherwise. and akin to what you would see from the NPCs in Crossbell, which is, saying something. I think part of it is just the merit of staying with the same characters in one place for an entire game rather than in the liberal games. You're kind of going from place to place, and you're not seeing those characters throughout the entire game. It felt like, I feel like I'm having a hard time articulating my points here. I feel like I'm using a lot of words to describe something relatively simple, which is just that in Trails of Cold Steel 1, there are a lot of flaws. There are a lot of steps back from the previous games, but it felt like they were making something new and interesting that felt like it had a lot of love and thought and soul put into it. I hate soul. I'm going to stop saying soul. It does not have soul put into it. I think the word I'm looking for more than that is heart. It has a lot of heart put into it. And over the course of the next few games, Trails of Cold Steel 2, 3, and 4, it feels like the heart got violently ripped out, and you're only left with that empty hole that's left behind when you take out the story, the actually good, interesting story, but then you also take out the heart and the love that was clearly put into Cold Steel 1. That's just kind of the impression that I get, and I think that's why Trails of Cold Steel 1 is by far my favorite of the tetralogy. After Cold Steel 1, I've talked about all the other Cold Steel games at this point already. They're all, they kind of get progressively worse, with, maybe a couple things that I enjoyed about Cold Steel 3 notwithstanding. They kind of just continue to fall off lower and lower to the point where Cold Steel 4, as I mentioned, is one of my least favorite games that I have ever played in my entire life. It genuinely... It was not good. The series was on a very noteworthy downward trend, in my opinion. And then along came The Legend of Heroes Trails into Reverie, which revitalized my enthusiasm for the series. I mean, I say that I kind of played all these games in relatively quick succession, so it's not like I had a long time for Cold Steel 4 to fester and not like the series before Reverie came out. I'm glad I didn't, though, because I'm not sure if I would have actually played Reverie if I was able to sit with Cold Steel 4 for more than, a couple months. But Trails into Reverie, the best way that I could describe Trails into Reverie is that they got good people in the writer's room again. They actually sat down and they said, okay, fuck all that shit. We're gonna actually sit down, we're gonna write a good story with compelling characters, with a compelling conflict, themes that focuses on other characters and builds on struggles of previous characters in new and interesting ways instead of just having them be mouthpieces that don't actually get to do anything interesting. One of my favorite things about Reverie, and I am gonna get into spoilers going forward. This is the last game that I'm gonna talk about today, so you can skip to the end of the episode if you don't. Probably only like minor spoilers though. So if you don't care too much, or like moderate spoilers. So as long as you don't care too much about that, you're good to go. But one of my favorite things about Reverie is that it reintroduces the Crossbell characters as mainstays in the story. They were pretty significant in Trails of Cold Steel 4 as well, but in Reverie they actually come back and Lloyd is an entire protagonist of the game. And all the Crossbell characters, Tio, Ellie, Randy, Risha, and I almost said Alex Dudley, Wazy Hemisphere, Alex Dudley too. Alex Dudley gets to do some stuff. They all come back and they're great, and like the conflict for those characters in that game in Reverie is such a love letter to people who played Crossbell. It feels like they thought about like where the characters started and how their perspective shifted over the course of their two games that focused on them, the Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure. And they thought logically, like, what would be a conflict that these guys are experiencing? And the way that they handle that conflict is so good. It feels so cathartic to see these characters actually get to do something again, to actually feel written, instead of just being there for you to point at the screen and say, hey, I know that guy, that's Lloyd Bannings. It's, oh, man, it's just such a breath of fresh air. Reen comes back as a protagonist, and he, I think just by merit of not having as much screen time and having to share the screen time with others, his route feels interesting as well. I mean, granted, it is probably still the worst of the three, but I still think it was okay. It is definitely not as bad as the other Cold Steel games, that's for sure. Because I think you can take breaks from it, you can see the perspectives of other characters, and Reen has to put in more work, and the characters that he's with have to put in more work to actually stand out, I guess, and because they don't get to hog the spotlight anymore. I don't know if that explanation makes any sense, but that's how it kind of felt to me. And then the new protagonist that they introduce in this game, it's so his name is C, and his identity is a spoiler that I absolutely do not want to reveal here today, and I won't. But just suffice it to say that C is probably my favorite protagonist in the entire series by a significant margin, I would say. He is so good. His story is some of the best Trails writing content that has ever existed. And it feels genuinely like they said, we're going to, like they're going to get, I don't want to be mean to the people who wrote the Cold Steel games. You know, like, I'm sure it was a labor of love to a certain extent. I'm sure they did their best. But it literally felt like it was a team of amateurs that had taken over a series known for interesting and compelling writing, and then they finally said, "All right, guys, either they came into their own with this game, or they got new people in. I don't know what it was, but something changed, and it feels fantastic." Now, why is it not like the best Trails game then? What's holding it back? What is it about it that I like even less than Cold Steel 1, which had all these problems that I mentioned just a little bit ago? Well, it has a lot of the same problems as the later Cold Steel games in some regards. For one thing, and I think this specific thing is what pushed it over the edge. I was like on the fence between these two, and I still do basically consider it a tie, but Reverie was locked in to be my favorite of the post-Crossbell games by a pretty wide margin until this happened. Essentially, and this is like a somewhat significant spoiler, so I maybe skip ahead if you care, but I'll try to keep it vague. The villain of the Cold Steel games, they do this thing in pretty much all the Cold Steel games where every villain has to be, I mentioned this last episode, every villain has to be like actually a good guy, which, moral complexity can be good, right? Like I think morally gray characters can be pretty good. I think if they're executed well, obviously that's the most interesting type of villain, the ones that are maybe, they're doing this thing because they believe in the cause, or they're doing it for good reasons, or whatever it may be. Like, those villains are usually pretty good. But the problem with it in Cold Steel is that the conflicts feel so contrived, and it feels like no one is allowed to just do a bad thing, and for the game to say, like, yes, that is a bad thing that they did, and they need to, like, be judged for it, or they need to, you need to, like, I feel like I'm explaining this very poorly. Every character, every villain in Trails of Cold Steel, especially 3 and 4, is like, they have some level of conflict within them. That's like, I shouldn't be doing this, and their reasons for doing it anyway vary in terms of the quality. Sometimes it kind of makes sense, sometimes it's just absolute nonsense. And all of them feel like they have very long, drawn-out redemption arcs that are both unfinished, like they don't get enough time to cook, so they don't even work as redemption arcs, but also, like, they're way too protracted. There's a character in Trails of Cold Steel 4, she's a villain in Trails of Cold Steel 4, that really, based on the events at the end of Cold Steel 3, should have just defected and joined your group at the start of Cold Steel 4. Like, it would have made perfect sense. It would have felt like a logical progression for her character, but they refused to do it. Instead, they have to drag out this conflict the whole game, and she's still a villain by the end of the game. But she's like the entire time she's like, "Oh, but I don't want to do this. This hurts my heart. I don't want to. I'm doing the wrong thing. I know I am." It's like, just shut the fuck up. Either join us or like suck it up and be a villain. Like whatever you want to do, but stop doing this. And that energy carries over into Reverie. The main antagonist of the Cold Steel games is one of the few villains that I would say generally gets to be evil. He gets to actually be like a conniving villain who is doing this for what he believes to be good reasons, but the game doesn't try to present him in a sympathetic light. It understands that what he's doing is wrong, and as a result, you're supposed to say, like, okay, I can understand why he's doing this, but I also know that, like, we need to stop him. You're motivated to stop him because like, the game presents to you in no uncertain terms that he is a villain and what he's doing is wrong. I almost called it Cold Steel 5. Reverie decides to give him a pseudo-redemption arc, and it just didn't land, and it took away the weight from one of the best villains in a post-Crossbell Trails, and I hated it. Like, that sucked so much, and that was the nail in the coffin for me saying, okay, this game is, at best, about even with Cold Steel 1. And then in general, it uses a lot of the same tropes. It uses a lot of the same problems that I have from Cold Steel 1 through 4. Some of the characters still aren't very interesting and don't get a lot to do, just because at this point there are so many, and they just don't, they aren't given any amount of time to like actually be cool and interesting. Other than, like there's a handful, like some of the core groups, are pretty good, but more like, I think there's, I don't know, there's like 50 playable characters in this game, and it's like, there does not fucking need to be that many, man. Like, cut out some of the guys from Reen's group or whatever. And there's some that are playable that really, that just feel like bonus characters that didn't need to be there. I don't know. It falls short in a few really frustrating ways, which is a shame because otherwise, this would be a contender. I know people who have this as their favorite Trails game, or like up there as their favorite Trails game. And I get it. I respect it. But it just has too much of that baggage carried over for me to rank it among my favorites. And I honestly, this is kind of the disappointing thing, is that I think that baggage is here to stay. I think this is how they write Trails now, and it's just going to be that way from now until whenever the series ends, which, probably not anytime soon. I mean, hopefully, unless the series gets canceled. We are making progress. There is an end. We're not just kind of spinning our wheels in the same place. We're moving from place to place. It does seem like there's going to be an end eventually, but, who knows when that'll be. Okay. So Trails of Cold Steel 1 and Trails into Reverie. Again, you can effectively think of this as a tie, but if I had to pick one to put over the other, I would say Trails of Cold Steel 1 very slightly takes the edge for me. But otherwise, we're done. With this episode, at least, we have 10 more games to get through, and I'm just going to cut the bullshit because I went on for Trails for about 20 minutes, and now this episode is an hour when I was thinking that I was going to get it done in like 45 minutes. So, it'd be like that, I guess. Anyway, look forward to the next part going out, hopefully at some point soon. I might even just record it after I do this one. I'm not sure. I don't really feel like editing this one right now, so I might as well do something else. And in the meantime, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.